small wake-up call, but it wasn't the wake-up call. But it was just a sense of like, oh, I identify with these people. But it took me 2 years to actually like really get it.
Des Bishop, welcome to the Mindful Podcast.
This is great. It's great to be here. I feel like in some ways I've been ahead of the game on all this mindfulness lark, and then in other ways I've fallen behind in more recent times.
I think you were. Well, I absolutely loved your bit that you were doing on like the fact that we were all mindful in the 80s and 90s, just
Yeah.
by the fact that we had to be bored and, we were in the moment.
You know what's funny, because you're a comedian, so you understand both sides of this. That bit like evolved into something great, but it really is about three bits molded into one. And the very
Mm,
last, like I used to have like a throwaway line about mindfulness, like that they teach kids mindfulness, which is like surprising to me.
mm,
Uh, and then slowly over time, the bit kept getting new things that we used to do that were just like where you were just bored. Essentially, back in the day, my thinking on it and the language that I had, which is very much from like AA, NA, was like times where you were just forced to be with yourself. That's my language. And I used to frame it more in the you're forced to be with yourself because this bit has been evolving over like a long time. And
mm.
then somewhere along the line, accidentally, I put the mindfulness beats into it, like on an improv, where like I would say everything, every incident of how we used to not be distracted, and then I would punctuate it with mindfulness. And then it became a mindfulness quote unquote routine. And that seemed to take it to like the next level. And in terms of its insane virality, which is like kind of a bit of a career changing clip of mine, uh, the mindfulness kind of framing of it really got into like the life coach world, and like big people
Mm.
in that space were like sharing it. And then next thing I had just like all these new followers, and almost every one of them in their bio was like, you know, mindfulness, healing, soul searching. Like suddenly I had all
So
these new.
a new age prick like me.
Well, I see. I don't see. The here's the thing, which is crazy, is that now it gets framed in the kind of like new age, and there's some funny stereotypes and tropes you can
Mm.
make fun of. But I've actually, oddly enough, been in that world sort of like in a different way for like a very long time. But it was always framed in the parameters of recovery, getting well, things that I need to do to keep myself from slipping back into my old ways. So it was framed a little bit more like uh upkeep, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean, from the essentially because I we can talk about it, but I stopped drinking and using drugs when I was 19, and it's a big turning point in my life, but has always been a big presence in my life, and was a very big presence in my 20s in terms of my friendships, and like just everything in my life in those early years was recovery. So all my quote unquote wellness, as they call it today, uh, was framed through uh, addiction and healing from addiction.
Yeah, well, I wonder, is that how it's changed a bit in that maybe in those years gone by, we would have looked on that as, oh, well, that's stuff for people maybe dealing with addiction or, they have to kind of do that. Whereas now people just needed to get through the day, you
Well,
know?
what I've loved, and I don't know, did we talk about this before or not when you were on my podcast? But what I've loved about the modern, like, revolution, really, of people speaking about looking after your mental health is that when we were in early recovery, particularly like I used to go to meetings in Cork, and like in Cork, there was just a lot of people like me in NA, right? Because they were all young guys like me that we weren't
Mm.
heroin. Most of us were not like heroin addicts. We were all addicted to like the rave drugs and alcohol and keeping the party going. And all of us kind of were like minded, but we all said that the people that weren't addicts were normies. We called them normies. And we really thought that they didn't understand like how much work we had to put into ourselves to just function in
Mm.
society, right? And it wasn't so much an us and them, but it was just this sense, and it sounds cultish, and I know a lot of people do actually accuse the 12-step stuff of being cultish, but if we take it out of the frame of cultishness, it did it stopped us actually from sharing too openly about our struggles, not just with addiction, but just about like getting through life, because we kind of thought that like normies wouldn't understand because
Mm,
to they weren't forced to like take a look at themselves. You know what I mean? They weren't forced at that young age, especially for us because we were so young, to go like, I need to change parts of who I am. Otherwise, I'm not going to survive. I'm not going to be able to make it through, you know? So there was it was an intensity behind it, a motivation that was pretty much like, this is survival stuff. But we always saw the normies as separate. But what's been great about this mental health revolution is that everybody's talking about the same shit. And luckily, recovery always said that addiction is just a symptom. And you can see everybody has their own symptoms for their struggles.
mm.
And it's also very varied, which is also great because then you go, oh, this isn't really about addiction. This is just about the very varied ways that people can struggle with their mental health, or even that they can just struggle with their identity, sense of purpose, like all these different things that we came across thinking they were all framed in the addiction concept are really just framed in the life concept. And that's great because instead of going, I go to meetings to identify with other like minded people, you say, well, I'm in this life, I'm in this world with other like minded people. You know, it brings us all together in a sense of community. Obviously, the community is for the people that are being open and honest about it, you know, and not
Mm.
everybody's on the same plane, but you do feel like there's more of us in this than we thought.
Yeah. What was that first meeting like? I think that's the thing that scares a lot of people in thinking, I know I probably have, issues with addiction, but the idea of sitting on a plastic chair in a circle in a weird hall would be
Mm,
too freaky for a lot of people. And that's the image you have in your mind. You might have seen it in movies or,
yes.
people standing around drinking shitty coffee. Um, what was that
That's
first
all
meeting
true.
like for you? Is it,
well, well,
yeah.
so first of all, both my dad was very active, like AA guy, and then my
Mm,
mother was like a dry drunk, as they say, but she had stopped drinking too. Both of them were not good, but I they weren't drunk in my lifetime. I grew up with like in a sober house, so I had like very positive associations with AA. All my dad's best friends were AA guys, and so when I was 17, I struggled with alcohol from the start. Like I had bad outcomes from the get go. Like I don't know the science behind it, but it was never meant to be for me, you know? And so at the age of 17, I had a bad incident with my best friend up here in Dublin, actually, but I was in boarding school in Wexford and I was heading back to New York. But my flight was the following day, and myself and a friend of mine from Wexford went up to Dublin to go on the piss. And I'm not going to get into the details, but I'm the bad guy in the story, and it was bad, you know, and it destroyed that friendship, and it was just like another tale in the now kind of
mm,
like consistent tale of like bad outcomes from me getting too drunk, blacking out, and bad shit happening. So once again, I was up in the morning, like desperately trying to find my passport because I had left my bags in his brother's office, and it was just like mayhem trying to get back to the States, which it didn't need to be. So when I got back to this, I was just riddled with shame. I just felt so terrible, and I had called that friend, and he wouldn't talk to me the following morning. Like he wouldn't talk to me, and it was terrible. And I felt like I just felt so bad. And that evening, my dad was going to his normal AA meeting, and I said, "Dad, can I go with you to the meeting?" Like under the, in my mind, it was under the sort of auspices of, "Dad, let's spend some time together," you know. But
mm.
he knew. He told me subsequently that I was probably a little bit curious because they had already been worried. Don't forget I was already living in another country because of other fuck ups and other crazy shit that was going on in my life. A lot of which would be framed in the mental health context today, but wasn't then. But I was not a normal adolescent. So anyway, this is a long version of a really could be a short story, but my dad took me to this meeting. A couple of guys I knew from like friends of his, but they're all going around in a circle. Uh, this, all meetings are different. They're not always in circles, but this one was a small enough meeting, so they were just going in order. So my dad whispered to me, like, when it comes to you, you can just say, "I'll pass."
Mm,
But there was like nothing that these guys were talking about that I didn't identify with. Obviously, I didn't ruin my kids' lives, or I didn't have the parenting shit that these guys had shame about, or the infidelity, or the broken marriages. Not that, but the essence of what they were talking about, things that they did, you know, and
mm.
the fucking emotional pain that they were talking about, and these were like 40, 50-year-old men. I was 17. I was like, I didn't say it to my father. I was like, yeah, but I was like, if this comes to me, I'm going to fucking share. Now, it never came to me, but I was just like, holy shit, man. Like, this is like these guys are talking about me. So that's not
And
when I got, that's not when I
mm.
got it. But anyway, that was my first meeting.
Did you find you could relate to your dad? Maybe you had more sympathy for what he went through when you saw
Well,
him in that context.
I mean, I always had like, my dad went through a lot, and I didn't know a lot of it at that time, and I learned that later. But I didn't need sympathy for my dad. I had a lot of respect for my dad on the not drinking front, and my dad was the very calm one of my two
Mm,
parents. So I didn't I didn't have a lot of thoughts actually about my dad in that context. I honestly was pretty self-centered. I was really just thinking about myself. I was really
You
just
were 19, in fairness.
I was really honestly more just having like a profound awareness that like the shit that was happening to me, particularly from 16 on, 16 was when
Mm,
I had some bad shit from 12 to 14, and then I went to Ireland, and Ireland kind of calmed me down just by virtue of like a lot of different shit. Boarding school, my cousins in Waterford who were great for me because they were very strict, and I needed that. I needed the structure. There was just a lot of things about Ireland that were fucking great for me and gave me a little reprieve. But once I, settled into Ireland and got up to my old ways, and honestly, the Irish kids kind of caught up with me and they started drinking. So then we're all drinking together. It all kicked off and like into the next level, the blackouts and the violence and just really horrible shit. So by the time I was at that meeting, I was like, damn, I have a problem. But that wasn't like profound other than I was just like, I identify with alcoholics. like I fucking, wet in the bed, blackout violence, like close calls, like literally the night before. You got to understand, I'm sitting in there with a hangover from like, what should have been like an arrest, you know?
mm.
And so it was like, like a small wake up call, but it wasn't the wake up call. But it was just a sense of like, oh, I identify with these people. But it took me 2 years to actually like really get it.
Yeah. My dad was an alcoholic and he had quit drinking. I had very, very vague memories of being really small. My older brothers and sisters, I'm the youngest of six, they'd have much clearer memories of his drinking days.
Yeah.
And it wasn't pleasant by all accounts. But he managed to come through and he went to AA and yeah, I always have had massive respect for him. I think certainly in later years when I had a bit more of a sense of myself of after what he managed. But I always wondered what he thought when, all his kids were passionate drinkers, you know, um, and he'd sort of he'd be going, "Oh, this is a lovely bottle of wine for everybody," but he wouldn't be drinking it. So there was still a sort of what would the word be? Not a glorification, but definitely, the attitude to alcohol in the house was still, oh, this is a lovely bottle of Barolo, or, and it was, oh, lovely, and champagne and all that. And he would pour everybody's drink,
Oh,
but
really?
he'd have a red lemonade. And I always wondered what he thought of everyone else, clearly taking to the booze and him knowing there's some genetic influence possibly here, and I don't remember ever having a conversation where he would say, be careful with this stuff, or he just kind
Oh,
of let everybody do their thing,
well, that
you
was
know.
not the case for me. my mother told me, my mother told me when I was 14, the second time that I got caught blackout when I was
Mm,
14. So once was Mother's Day Eve, 1990, which is May in the States. And then the following summer, that summer, the summer before I came to Ireland again, caught fucking black, pissing. I was pissing in the fireplace, and just like funny shit, like when it's a one off, but it's pretty consistent. So she caught me twice when I was 14, like blackouts. So then she actually said to me, like, you don't know it yet, but you're an alcoholic. Alcohol is going to cause you a lot of problems in your life. She's like, all my life, I've seen the pain of alcoholism in myself, in my parents. Her parents were terrible alcoholics. Your father was an alcoholic. It just doesn't work for us, but you have to do your journey. And I just hope it doesn't, cause you too much pain. She said that to me when I was 14. I'm
Wow.
paraphrasing, but essentially it was that.
Yeah. And of
So,
course,
but
she was
that's,
right.
that's a
You had to
different,
work your own way through it.
well, but I was lucky though. The paranoia that they gave me probably made me more open to like taking it seriously when I was younger. Cause like on paper, I guess, but honestly, for me, and I didn't take a fuckload of drugs, but emotionally, the drugs just wiped me out like very fast. I just couldn't take it. Like I just couldn't handle the emotional like emptiness that was caused by my life when I got into like
Mm,
LSD and ecstasy and speed, and it was just like so fast because it wasn't like, oh, I'm into drugs now, let me build this up. It was basically like alcohol makes me fight and black out, and these drugs don't. So I just like on I just ingested as much of those drugs as I could as if it was alcohol, and I was spiritually and emotionally wiped by the summer of 1995. So it was more just like an absolute emotional breakdown that made me kind of go like, nah, not not for me. And
mm,
then the support that I got, because like I was 19, I was healthy. I could have easily got my shit back together and then had another try. But luckily, I just got in with some good people early on in the States originally, and then in Cork, especially, where we just like supported each other. And honestly, it really, if you were to listen to the conversations that we had in 1996 and 97 when I was still down there, we were young. We were all young. Like, uh, we talked a lot about our feelings. We talked a lot about like what's good for us, what's bad for us. And by the way, we did a lot of meditation. We did a lot of spiritual exploration, and we were honestly trying to find ourselves openly. And if you looked at the guys that I was hanging out with, I mean, these were guys from tough neighborhoods in Cork, you know, guys from Knocknaheeny, guys from Tolker, Ballyfihan, Curraheen, and Bishopstown. Like my closest friends, most of them were actually like working class, like kids that had tough, tough childhoods. And all of us were sitting there with our tough guy accents, me with my strong New York accent, and them with their like fucking fiends in the bureaus, fucking Cork accent, being like, I don't know, but I'm feeling a bit of fucking emptiness in myself, like, and like it sounds like a joke, but honestly, that's the way we were. And we went down to the Junction Barry, we went down to the Buddhist
mm,
meditation center in Allihies in West Cork a lot. We did Buddhist retreats, and we tried different types of meditation. Like I did a lot of shit that was like would nowadays be like hippy dippy wellness shit, but we were just trying to fucking feel normal.
mm. Life's a lot different now. Back in the States, um, you're obviously got your beautiful wife, and things are, I mean, I guess it's been a lot of changes for you over the last few years. Where are you
Yeah, John,
now in your
fucking
head?
pandemic.
You loving it?
Pandemic fucked everything up, man. Um, well, it's great. You just
Yeah.
never know where life's gonna go. You know, Hannah and I, we're just well suited to each other. we have a fun we have a fun relationship. We get each other's sense of humor. Like I always joke that Irish people go to like the States and they're like, I don't know how you do comedy here because these people have no sense of humor, and they're like, no crack. But like Hannah has one of the first things I said to Hannah, I think I actually said it to her on our first date, was I said to her, I said, you don't know what the crack is, but like you have it, you know? It's very hard to articulate, but just like you get it, you know? And because we hang out sometimes, and like our vibe when we get together with our mutual friends
Mm,
is like taking a piss, having a laugh, being silly. that's like a big part of who we are. And it's a big part of who she is too, and actually a big part of how her family interacts. And so the minute we got together, it was just like, oh, we're like vibrating on the same plane, and it was great. It was great. So
It seemed instant. I remember in my 20s and people would talk about, when you meet the one, you just know. And it used to annoy the shit out of me because I thought, what is that? What do you just know? You just know. And then I met my missus, who you know, Karina, and I
and
was like,
also an awesome person.
yeah, I was like, holy shit, you do just know. You do. It's true. And when I saw you, it was suddenly like, oh my God, he knows it's happening.
Yeah, no, I definitely knew. I mean, I knew before too, but just life is just life.
Yeah.
But we met at a good time. I mean, it probably helped that it was like in the middle of lockdown and there wasn't a lot of distractions, so I was able to go, okay, let's fucking get to know somebody. Let's
Yeah.
actually get lost in it. No gigs to distract you. No, like my remaining demons of needing attention and career obsession and like a lot of the stuff that takes you away from yourself. And I'm not saying that's all bad, but just a lot of the stuff that like
Mm.
can maybe uncenter you, decenter you. They were all gone. Plus, my mother had died the year before, so I had just had like pandemic induced enforced solitude. So I had really like gone back into the monastery and really sort of like felt a lot of feelings, had a difficult relationship with my mother, and I was able to just like, kind of like really sort of like get to the other side of that stuff, which was quite helpful because when I met Hannah, I'd say I was more open, less guarded to
Mm.
love, which I don't even think I can say in my own voice.
Well, actually, there was a nice little bit in one of the episodes of the podcast you do with Hannah, the burner phone, and which I really enjoy. And I think you get a great sense of your relationship really quickly when you listen to that podcast. You can, there's little gentle ribbing and not
Yes.
letting each other off the hook with little things, and you get a good insight. But you were talking about how your mother used to ask you to play with her hair.
Oh, that was just the other day. Yeah. That was only a couple of
Yeah.
weeks ago, that episode.
And it immediately lit something up for me because my mom used to do the same thing. She'd be
Is
sitting
that
on the
right?
couch and she'd say, give me curls, she used to call it. So you'd
Yeah.
kind of,
Which is
you'd,
essentially what we were doing too. Yeah.
yeah, you'd make circles with your fingers on her hair. It was one of those, just those little tiny things that you'd completely forgotten until you said it and you're like, oh yeah. And of course, as a kid, you're like, I don't want to do curls, but she'd be like, go on, go on.
Yeah. And it relaxed.
Um,
It kind of relaxed my mother, I guess.
yeah, it's
She
like
wasn't the
a,
most
a head
affectionate
massage.
person. That would go down in the top three affection experiences that I had with my mother. But that
Well,
was nice. That was
yeah,
nice.
we
But
also
I had
have the,
forgotten.
mm,
Oh, that was because, just for context,
yeah,
uh, our episodes have themes, and the themes were "What's the craziest thing you ever did for money?" And what inspired that conversation was a woman said her very hairy father used to give her $20 to shave his back.
yeah. And they'd all be going, me, let me do
Yeah.
it. Because they wanted the money. You're thinking, oh my God,
But those
that
things
is
are
just,
not, that like those memories are nice actually, little like childhood things. Now I don't have kids, you have kids, right? But I don't have kids, so if
mm,
Hannah and I have kids, I'll be curious what that version will be. But my dad was more naturally like loving, so I have a lot more memories of my father's like, affection and nurturing than my mother's. But that was a nice
yeah,
memory. And my brother brought it up recently too. So we all have that memory. Will you do my
yeah.
hair?
I think you tend to kind of subconsciously repeat those things. I'm constantly asking my kids for head rubs, which I don't get. You can
Is
get
that
them when,
right? Oh, that's so.
yeah. So when they're small, they'll do it because they just will do whatever you ask them. But then there's a point of, wait a minute, I don't have to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad used to sort of pat me on the head if he was walking by me and I was sitting down. And I remember his wedding ring used to kind of bang into my skull. So it was affectionate and painful at the same time. But I found myself doing that as well with my own kids, and they're kind of like, ah, your rings, So I think you subconsciously repeat these things,
I think you probably do. And
Yeah.
my dad sang to us a lot. And like, anytime I get a hold of like a kid, like an infant, I will immediately like, hold them up on my shoulder and walk around and start humming or singing into their ear, which I know that that's what my dad did because I saw him do that with his grandkids anyway. And I just automatically do that. So I guess you're right.
You mentioned something, I can't remember which chat it was I heard, and it's the altar boy thing. And you and I have that in common too, that we were both altar boys. And I guess with everything that goes on, when you say it now, you get a mixed reaction. But I have very fond memories of being an altar boy because you're kind of hanging out with your buddies. You're out in front of everybody, which performers love. Um, and I was thinking, like, whatever you think about church and mass and all that stuff, and organized religion and Catholic Church and all that, there were certain things about you got to go somewhere every week, and there were certain things that were really nice. And I think that the smells of a church I still miss, and I love going in there because it was a particular smell. And there was like the acoustics when you were up around the altar. If there was a kind of church that had carpet, the acoustics were a bit different up there. And I have all these nice little memories and smells and triggers with all that stuff. Do you?
Yeah. I mean, I like it's 50-50, right? Like I definitely have no bad memories of being an altar boy, other than
Yeah.
there was that one stretch of mass where I noticed in Ireland the altar boys got to kneel by the altar and ring the bell,
Mm.
which would have been great, but we didn't do that. So for that whole period, which is the most important part, right? It's the consecrate, like that's the bit of the mass that's the most sacred. The actually turning the bread and wine into the blood of Christ, the body and blood of Christ. We had to stand for that whole thing, and I always remember finding that part quite annoying. And I just when once we got to the Our Father, I was like, finally, like we're nearly on the move now,
Yeah, yeah,
because then I could come up and wash the priest's hands so that he could he could do the breaking of the bread and all that. So
yeah. Because it was a
so
tier. There was the jobs you got there was a tier of importance, And
yes,
if you got to ring the bell, that was essentially lead guitar.
I
You were
was and I
you
was
were
jealous of the bell guys because we didn't have
yeah,
the bell at all. So when I got to Ireland, I was like, "Wow, you're like you're doing it. You're making noise." And
yeah,
everyone bows. It's like I when I used to do a bit about it, I always just say, "You ring the bell and everybody bows." It was like kneel before Zod, because I Superman 2 generation.
yeah.
But there was a power. There was a power, and the whole thing's very ceremonial, right? So
Mm,
ringing a bell, it's all very gothic, you know.
yeah, yeah. But I do think, it was healthy that people went somewhere once a week for the guts of an hour to at least for a few moments about something bigger than themselves. I think that was helpful. And I think that
Yeah,
we
I
kind of miss that. People don't have that time set aside at least once a week just to kind of go, no phone, just sit in there and think maybe for a few moments, yeah, maybe there is something bigger than me. I think that's healthy.
Yeah, well, I said for a long time, I don't talk, it's funny, I haven't talked about this in a long time, but I always said that like what we lost as a society from moving away from religion. Like Ireland's just a good example because I witnessed a real shift in my Irish lifetime. There has
Mm,
been like literally a humongous shift away from people regularly going to mass. Whether they've totally considered themselves not Catholic is irrelevant, but it's undebatable that
mm,
society is not centered around the church like it was when I got here, right? So I always felt that the thing that was lost and wasn't replaced was the sense of community and the focus. And obviously, as you're saying, that little bit of solitude or thinking about something spiritual. But on the flip side, I feel that because the church was such a toxic institution, the Catholic Church particularly, and with that, the solace of feeling something was greater, they prescribed very rigid criteria of what was good and what was bad, and that the morality was largely, I think, unhealthy, and that they inflicted generations of people with shame around sex and just, probably like actually, despite the teachings of Jesus being so tolerant, there was just elements of intolerance for anybody that didn't follow the path rigidly. That
Mm.
I would think, I'm not upset that people moved away from the church. I'm just upset that as a society, we haven't found something to replace that community wise, So it's without doubt that the world feels like communities within the world feel like less connected to each other, which I think is showing itself in people sort of like finding odd corners to unite, which are probably like not good.
Yeah, yeah. Um, your special was brilliant,
Oh,
and
of all people, it was a
what?
bit.
Yeah.
It was a bit. Some of the jokes were like better versions of jokes that I had recorded before, but going around the states, uh, doing these jokes that were written originally in Ireland, they kind of found like new life. So I said, I'll re-record them now with this kind of like American in your face energy that they've evolved into.
Yeah, and I think it's a phenomenal show. Obviously, you're still connected to the Chinese element. There's that great bit in it where you're interacting in Chinese on the stage. And I was like, do you keep your Chinese up? Do you still regularly go to China? Like I'm saying, I have a degree in French, and I could not stand up on stage and and start being funny in French because I don't spend enough time there. Do you
Well,
do you keep your
I don't
Chinese
keep,
fresh?
I keep it pretty fresh because it's easy to practice Chinese. Like my Irish went to shit because I
Mm,
don't practice it enough. But Chinese, anywhere you go in the world, you can practice your Chinese. And despite the fact that it almost sounds like an inappropriate thing to say, it's very easy to find Chinese people. like I got a pretty good guess if I say, "Hey, do you speak Mandarin?" I got to say 80% chance they're going to say, "Yeah." Right? When cuz I know the right people to ask. Whereas I could spend the whole fucking day walking around Ireland taking a guess on who speaks Irish. I could probably be wrong like, you know, equivalently
mm.
80% of the time. You got to find somebody who's comfortable speaking Irish like regularly. So, and then in New York, obviously, I'm not going to find somebody that speaks Irish, but it's very easy for me to find people to practice my Mandarin. So my Mandarin hasn't improved since the Chinese days, but I get to speak it a lot.
Mm.
And then obviously those Chinese bits, like those bits in English that I wrote in China, kind of fish out of water bits, but also the bits about learning Mandarin. I just didn't realize, but they translate really well to anybody. Like they're just universal bits,
Mm.
the same as writing a bit about when you bought a dog. Uh, it's just a bit or probably better to describe like a bit where somebody takes like some historical fact and writes some funny jokes about history. And you go, it's not just funny, but actually it's kind of an interesting take on whatever, World War One or something. Uh, so the learning Mandarin stuff, the
Mm.
jokes that I wrote about learning it turned out to be pretty universally funny, which really helped me when I first started gigging in the States. Cause like when I first started gigging in the States, man, like I still was feeling that like a lot of my jokes didn't translate, cause like, I mean, the immersion is just the easy example, but like people always bring up the immersion to me. That's like my my fucking let it be. But you know, like it's not funny to anybody other than Irish people. It's not even funny to 21-year-old Irish kids now. They don't get it.
No.
That's a joke of its time and it's a joke of its place. So like I had a lot of immersion type material that I was just like worried, like, what the fuck am I going to talk about in the States? What's going to resonate? But the Chinese stuff really hit like immediately. So that's how that stuff got.
Mm.
I used it a lot, so therefore it got better. And then
How
that's when
long
I
did it
learned. Go ahead.
sorry, how long did it take you to get really comfortable on stage in the States? Because I guess you probably felt caught between two stools for a little while.
All my career, I felt that, and it was really holding me back actually, because so I'd go to Australia and the room would be packed, but be all Irish people. And then I'd be ripping it with the Irish, but I wasn't winning over the Australians because the Australians were like, "What the fuck's going on here, mate?" Like I don't
Yeah.
know what copperface jacks is. Like it's just like, So you're killing it, and that's what the Irish want, and that's what I want to give them too. I want these
Mm.
expats to like get their little bit of home while they're watching me. But the industry in Australia is not going, wow, this guy is hilarious. And I was worse than others. Like other guys like David O'Doherty, Jason Byrne, they weren't having as much of that issue. They were like, their stuff was just more like universal, whereas my stuff was very fish out of water, Irish specific. Uh, and it wasn't that I didn't have other stuff, but it just never got a chance to grow. That was always my issue, was like, by the time I left Australia, say a 6 week trip, I'd only be just getting my head around like the universal bits, because the Irish crowds would always peter out by the end of the month, and then you'd be getting like more Aussie crowds, and like that. It's only then that you'd be starting to think like, oh, they like this, they don't like this. So I never really got a chance to like work it
Mm.
out, garden the bits and get rid of the weeds of this material for like an American audience. So after China actually had this like epiphany of like, wait a minute, I'm making Chinese people laugh in Mandarin, and I'm making expats from all over the world, not just Irish expats. I'm making expats from all over the world laugh about these unique experiences that we're all having in China. And I'm like suddenly like not an Irish comedian. I'm like a very international comic. So I was like, I can't just of course I wanted to go back gigging in Ireland. I wasn't like I wanted to turn my back on Ireland, but creatively and
Mm.
professionally, I was like, I got to perform to more than just Irish people. Like I can't go back into the safe zone of my Irish parochial material. And I love it, but it's more satisfying to do the Irish parochial material when you know that you also have a whole other side to your,
Yeah.
creative persona that can kill in the States. But it took some time to
Yeah.
really know which bits worked. And also just to like, honestly, if I can't even watch my old DVDs because they are literally DVDs, in case you think I'm using old language. I can't watch my old DVDs because I didn't realize how much my style had evolved. You only notice when you look back and you go, wow, man, I fucking take a long time to get to these punchlines. I don't know where these people had the patience to fucking hang around. But the stories are engaging, but they are like, they're fucking slow. And there's a lot of just like, there's a lot of performance. And trust me,
Mm.
people were loving it. I mean, you know, like I couldn't have done more. Like a lot of people saw it and they all seemed to love it, but like I
Yeah.
can't watch it because America actually it changed my style in a good way, because
Yeah, it is.
you got to be punchier and
Yeah. And I think social media clips weirdly help with that. If you take a bit and you give it to someone to cut, to edit, just for the nature of social media, they'll heavily cut it. But then when you see it actually delivered in a rhythm that's faster than how you delivered it on the night, you're like, oh, I could actually probably get to those gags a lot quicker and it would
the hundred
work. So,
percent
yeah, yeah.
that 100% helped me in the process. I mean, it wasn't just from meeting Hannah, but Hannah's really good at like spotting like how much quicker things can be social media wise. But even before that, though, the necessity for quicker jokes because of social media, definitely. Because here's the thing: it's like you learn this from editing, which is embarrassing, really, because you're like, oh, I didn't learn this on stage. I didn't realize that the joke was better by cutting
Mm.
it back live. I only realized when I literally cut out the shit electronically. I was like, wait a minute, it works
Yeah,
fucking better without all my bullshit in
yeah.
between.
I think if I just cut myself out, it'll really fly.
Yeah, Jesus. Well,
But you mentioned at the start that that mindfulness clip went viral and it had an impact. What's it like when you have a clip that really catches fire? Is it just now I have a load of DMs I never had before, or do
oh, I
things
mean,
actually
I got
shift?
100,000 new followers in a month
Wow.
from that clip, and the I'm so close was like a dirty clip. Um, and then a lot of the other ones did really well. Like a lot of the other ones to me were like not that viral, but actually all of them, like I probably had like 10 clips that were more viral than any clip I ever had before. But
Mm.
because some of them went so insane, suddenly I was like, oh yeah, that one did okay. But actually, that was all like relative to like how much some of them went insane. So, what the most satisfying part of it was that suddenly I was going to places in the States like Minneapolis recently, but at the time originally, just I can't even think of like just random cities where like, oh yeah, like Raleigh, North Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, no Irish people in the room. And the place is packed with fans that had never heard of me in
Mm.
2023. Like they only know me from January,
Cl-
February, March of 2024. And
Amazing.
they're into it. I mean, they're all 35 and up, which I just have to embrace who I am. That they like my back in the day boomer humor, but it's fucking it's fun. And the
Yeah.
other fun thing, which I've mentioned on stage, but the mindfulness bit has this one bit which to me was a throwaway bit. I'll give you the backstory. In the bit, I say, because I'm contrasting like how young people won't. I say we didn't have to be taught mindfulness because we were mindful half of every day because we didn't have a cable service in our pocket. That's what that's what I compare
Mm.
the iPhone to. Just like always something to watch whenever you have a minute to yourself. So the first example I give is when you waited for somebody, you waited, right? Mindfulness. And then the second example, I always thought, and I did this routine for a long time. I always thought it was a throwaway line, which was sitting on a bus watching condensation drip, mindfulness. And I never thought anything about that bit, but it was the 50% of the comments were about watching condensation drip. And the
Yeah.
funny thing was that it's literally from the memory of Sunday nights in Waterford. I would have to get I lived with my cousins at the weekend, and then Sunday night I would get on the bus to go back to fucking boarding school. And even though I liked boarding school, it was kind of dreary. And the Sunday nights, the Sunday scaries, Glen Rowe, and all these jokes that people say about the Sunday scaries. But when you're in fucking boarding school in Ireland in the winter, and you're actually not even from there, and you've never experienced my first fucking Irish winter was just dark. It was darker. It smelled like coal. Still to this day, when I smell coal, I feel a bit like I don't like the smell of coal because it
Mm.
reminds me of that dreary homesickness I had the first Irish winter. The only time I begged to come back, which left and never came back because I loved living in Ireland. But I had the after I'd been back to New York for Christmas in 1990 into 1991, I fucking hated being here. And it was the dark days of January, February. And those walks back, getting on that bus and the walks back to St. Peter's, because I would get off the bus and have to walk up the back lane. And a fucking smell of coal coming out of these Wexford 2 up, 2 down cottages that I would walk by. I always think of how fucking miserable I was. So, still to this day, I
Yeah.
hate coal. But I also remember getting on the bus, Aaron, and sitting on the bus, and it would just be damp, and I'd be watching these fucking droplets, and like, RT radio would be on like faintly, and it was just like I didn't fucking like it. And
Yeah.
that was always the vision. When you have a vision when you say a sentence,
Yeah.
every time I said that joke, watching condensation drip, I saw myself on that bus, Aaron bus, watching the droplets. So it wasn't even like a fun memory. And then everybody in the comments was like, "Oh my God, the drips, you're taking me back. I used to pick two drips and say they were in a race and see which one would make it to the bottom, or two drips would join forces and become a super drip." And everybody had these like drip memories. And then John Bishop, when I told him, he was saying, "Yeah, me and my brother used to pick a drip each and we would have a competition." So people like having competing drips, two different people. So it turns out that that's like a universal memory. Whereas I thought it was a very Irish memory because condensation is a big part of an
Yeah.
Irish life.
And Bernard O'Shea used to do a joke about the poorly insulated Irish windows, where it was wetter on the inside of the window than it was on the outside. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I used to say that in St. Peter's, even the walls dripped. But then
Yeah.
after the Ferns report, I realized why. Because if I'd seen the shit they'd seen, I'd be crying too. That's like a dark one, but it's kind of funny. But yeah, I'd never seen a lot of that like inside fucking condensation shit. I didn't know Bernard had that. It's very funny. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Come here. You mentioned John Bishop there. You got the Bishop Exchange, the new podcast, which I'm loving. There's a few episodes up there now. People can check out. But you did a little bit with AI, which blew my mind. And I think we hear a lot about AI, but sometimes we don't really understand the practical applications. A lot of people don't even realize when they're using AI. But you were
yes.
messing around with themes, and I loved it.
Yeah. So what happened was John, first of all, how John asked me to do the pod was he goes, I was in New York at the time. He calls me. He goes, So I asked ChatGPT, is it would it be a good idea for John Bishop and Des Bishop to do a podcast together? And the fucking breakdown of what ChatGPT said about why it would be a good
Mm.
idea for me and John to do a pod was so worryingly astute and spot on that I was like, fuck me. This is insane. But also, that's why John and I are doing a pod together because ChatGPT convinced John that it was a good idea to ask me.
Your
So it had been
AI
on his mind.
overlords told you to do it.
Yes, the fucking algorithm. So we didn't have a theme. So John was, by the way, and I like this because I'm a bit this way too. John just like wanted to start, and I feel like he wanted to start because it's one of those things that like if you start, you have no choice.
Mm.
But like we did very little prep. Like I feel like there would normally be a little more prep. So we were recording an ep within a week. So we didn't have a theme song. We just like we started real like garage style. You know, for a man as accomplished as John, especially, you would
Mm.
expect like more people to be involved and just like, you know, more pressure, expectation. But he was like, no, fucking, I'm in New York, we're recording, and we recorded, right? So it just started. So no theme song, just like no frills. So I had heard that there was, you know, AI music, right? So I looked it up and I got this app, Suno, which according to the internet was the best AI music app. But I had no idea really like how it worked. So then hold on, I got to log in, but we're going to do one now, right? But I got to log in first because, oh no, I'm in. So I was shocked. So what the one with John, I said, so you can do any genre. So the first one I said was, I want a podcast intro song in a techno style for a podcast called The Bishop Exchange with Des Bishop and John Bishop. And the song that we played, which you can see on a clip on our Instagram or listen to the episode, was the song that you heard.
Mm.
But now, Dermot and I, you and I, are going to create a song right now. But just so people know that we're doing it together, like that
Mm.
it's right now. You pick a genre, right? So you pick a genre. What do you want? Yeah,
Eight,
just in case you get stuck.
80s rock.
Okay, okay, that's good. I have a version of that for the genre. Okay, so I have to type this, so forgive me if my mic isn't that close to my mouth. So I want an '80s rock song with about comedians Des Bishop and Dermot Whelan that talks about mindfulness. Is that all right?
Yeah.
And now I'm going to create it. That's all. That's all we've put in. It says your groove is on the way. Now I'll send you the file so it sounds great. But for this very untechnical version, I'm going to play it through my microphone so we can have a genuine reaction. My beats are brewing. It's saying I didn't put the clock on, but obviously it's not even long enough for this conversation to get awkward. It says bringing your musical vision to life, um, and we will see. You know,
Man, I'd
it,
say
it, the crazy thing is
jingle
that
jingle writers all over the world are
yeah,
just
well,
they're on job search at the moment.
and
Send it on to me. And
you
sorry, I
get it.
have it now. Yeah, it's just gonna play now. Just downloaded it. There
Uh,
we go.
turn it up, baby.
Laughing Mind.
Oh yeah, I didn't even see the title. They put that on it. Slicing words like razor blades, crowds roaring with each stroke. Life's comedy masquerade. Dermot joins the laughter train, but his mind's a peaceful sea. Finding calm in all the pain. Mindfulness is only plea. Laugh it out, breathe it in. Find your center in the grin. Life's a circus, but within. Peace and joy we strive to win. Silent moments steal the show. Like it's
Wow.
insane. Like some of it literally describes your show. You know, remember like cuts through. What does it say? Cuts through the tears with a smile or something. Like
What freaks me out is the voice. Like that's
because
not
it's not a
somebody.
human. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. It is
And
freaky.
yeah, because you can hear him sing, and then you kind of would guess what he sounds like when he's talking.
Yeah,
And
you put a face on him. Who's your
yeah,
guy? Who's your guy? What does your guy look like?
I'm seeing him.
My guy was white and he had long
Yeah,
brown
he's
hair.
definitely white. But did he have curly hair rock, 80s hair rock,
It's funny.
or was it straight?
My guy had long straight hair.
Yeah, I was
My
seeing
guy had
straight hair too. Definitely a denim collar of sorts. Possibly sleeveless.
Yeah, man. It's crazy. It's
Wow.
crazy.
I might have to work that track into my new live show.
Well, you don't even
Use
have
it
to
as
just get
that's like a
Suno and
show
then
closer.
yeah, it's like, you know, because the bit about me was nothing, but the bit about you was like so bang on. But here's the crazy thing. It's not just going off the information that I gave it.
Yeah.
It's going off information that it knows about you.
Yeah.
That's what's fucking freaky. So the reason why it's able to get like so good at the description of like what you do is because it also has seen it's gathering information about like reviews of your show. That's what's fucking freaky.
Yeah, I know it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Des, thanks so much for your time, man. It's a
Oh,
delight to
thanks.
have you back in Ireland. I know you're heading back to the States soon. But look, good luck with everything. It's amazing to see your success and that it's filtering back over here and that Irish crowds have a chance to enjoy you as well because and America just doesn't get to hog you all the time.
Yes. Well, this is wonderful. Thank you so much, Dermot, for having me.
Thanks, dude.